A court in Hong Kong has convicted 7 prominent pro-democracy activists and politicians for their role in anti-government protest in 2019. 2 other defendants had previously pleaded guilty. Now, these defendants, they included the man known as Hong Kong's father of democracy, Martin Lee. He is the 82-year-old founder of the Democratic Party. Also, 73-year-old media tycoon Jimmy Lai. He's one of the most outspoken critics of the current administration. And Margaret Ung, a 73-year-old former lawmaker. Nearly every leading voice of opposition in Hong Kong is now in jail, on trial, or in exile. DW's Phoebe Kong met up with activist Lee Cheuk Yan before the verdict for a look at the decades-long democracy struggle against Beijing.
A small flat in downtown Hong Kong, where the world's only museum dedicated to the 1989 Tiananmen crackdown is located. The military repression in Beijing 32 years ago changed the course of many people in China and Hong Kong, including Lee Cheuk Yan.
I was there during the June 4th massacre, and I was detained for 3 days. After my release back to Hong Kong, I pledged that I would spend my lifetime in fighting for the democracy in China, and so that those who sacrifice would not be in vain.
3 decades on, Lee Cheuk Yan is facing a different fate. Critics see another massive crackdown being carried out by Beijing, this time on its most liberal and democratic city, Hong Kong, in the wake of anti-government protest. He and 8 others were charged for organizing and attending an unauthorized assembly. That rally, in which over 1 million people took part, was one of the few without violent clashes. Every one of the defendants are high-profile figures. Apart from media tycoon Jimmy Lai, all are former lawmakers or icons of the opposition movement, like Martin Lee, who is known as father of democracy. Each of the charges carries a maximum 5-year jail term. This case is just the tip of the iceberg, with over 10,000 others arrested. For Lee Cheuk Yan, it's the first verdict among the 9 charges for which he's on trial. Beijing's recently imposed sweeping national security law and its overhaul of the city's electoral system intensify the fear. Lee Cheuk Yan organized Hong Kong's Tiananmen morning vigil every year, calling for an end to China's one-party rule for decades, an act that could make him a prime target under Beijing's security law. This year, he will likely be absent for the very first time.
In this era, in a way that going to jail is part of the struggle now. I would comfort myself by saying that this is already something of a blessing for me, that I would only have to go to jail after 40 years of activism in Hong Kong. But I'm ready to pay the price and ready to face it.
Having witnessed Hong Kong's decades-long struggle, the 64-year-old activist is not optimistic. But he believes that his successors will continue to fight for democracy until they finally reach the goal.
And for more on this, let's bring in Nathan Law, pro-democracy activist from Hong Kong and former student leader, joining us from London, where he is in exile. Nathan, thanks for joining us on the program today. You know those who have been convicted. They are veterans of the pro-democracy movement. What is your reaction to these verdicts, and what do you think it means for them?
So this case is just one of the case in such a massive suppression. We've already got 47 prominent activists being arrested under the national security law, and these 7 defendants, they're all my friends and great activists, contribute a lot on Hong Kong's democratic movement, and this is definitely a political persecution that they are being convicted because of peaceful assemblies.
Okay, so you call it a political persecution. As you mentioned, this is just one of, or rather a few of several cases that are before the court system. I'd like to ask you about the others that are as well. For example, the 47 pro-democracy politicians and activists who have been charged with subversion under the new security law for participating in an election primary that prosecutors say was part of a plan to subvert the government. Do you think they will also be convicted?
Well, we have to understand the nature of the National Security Court. The government can pick their judge. There is no jury available, and the government could choose to conduct the hearing without any presence of the public. So if you look into the condition of that, and you look into the ordinance of the national security law, which is written really thickly, and there is literally a large room for interpretation by the judge and by the court. So I think the possibility of them being convicted is actually quite high. So I think this is another example of how the government uses the national security law to quash dissident voice, and the world should continue to pay attention to it.
Given that, Nathan, put it into the big picture for us. What does it mean for the pro-democracy movement? What does it mean for the legal system?
So for now, the pro-democracy movement has stepped into a low tides. It's like we're stepping into a winter storm that every one of us has to face it. And possibly people tend to lie low, but if someone is still resisting, they will receive serious repercussion. But I don't think that will kill all determination of us fighting for democracy. I think many of us have already been in jail and see it as one of the cost that we have to pay on the road of struggle. So I think many of them actually have the mental preparation for that. And for the rule of law in Hong Kong, it's all gone under the national security law. And people's freedom of expression and freedom of association are being all annihilated. So I think that is a sad reality of Hong Kong.
And Nathan, these 7 convictions that we've seen today, they come amid efforts by China to only allow, quote, patriots to be part of the legislature. You know, Beijing and these pro-Beijing lawmakers, for their part, they say that the pro-democracy camp has been disruptive on the streets, disruptive in the legislature, where things could no longer get done. How do you respond to that?
The pursuit for democracy is completely legitimate. In 1997, when Hong Kong was handed back from the British government to the Chinese government, the Chinese government promised Hong Kong people that we will gradually get our democracy, and it should have happened 5 to 10 years ago. So for now, I think Beijing has always been trying to use these excuses to conceal the fact that they're breaking promise, breaking international treaty, and they are depriving Hong Kong people from their legitimate rights. And they're using legal persecution to silence us once again. So I think it is important that the world understands the rationale of the protest behind Hong Kong people, and also, seeing all these persecution as another wave of human rights violation from China, and try to hold them accountable.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nathan Law, pro-democracy activist from Hong Kong,
so
former
much.
student leader, on this day where, as we have mentioned, a court in Hong Kong has convicted 7 prominent pro-democracy activists. Nathan, thank you for sharing your view.
Thank you.